Barton, and she's the BCG Fellow focused on the future of consumer knowledge and insight. She's a core member at BCG of the marketing, sales and pricing, and consumer practices, as well as a member of the corporate development practice. Her specialties include apparel, specialty retail, and private equity. I had the pleasure of working with Christine on a benchmarking study of consumer insights that she'll talk to you about today that was completed in the last quarter of 2015. And Christine, in addition to her work on consumer insights, she leads the firm's global consumer sentiment survey and is an expert on millennials, having led BCG's global millennials research since 2011. Please join me in welcoming Christine Barton.
Well, if you hadn't guessed from how I was dressed, you're going to definitely guess from my slides that I'm a consultant and not a marketer. I have no video, so we're gonna go old school. And what I want to talk to you about today is less the content of insights and the insight capability, but how you actually develop that capability and focused on the insights function within that capability. So effectively what we did, some of you may remember a 2009 study that BCG did on the insights function, and it was called something along the lines of, can you hear your consumer's voice? Well, at the time in 2009, there wasn't a framework, or at least the industry told us that there wasn't a framework on how to think about developing the insights function from where it may have started to the potential or the possibility that both industry insiders but companies and marketers thought it had. And we did that work in 2009, and then it took us quite a long time, 7 or 8 years, to refresh it. And what I want to talk to you about today is the refresh of that we did in partnership with Yale and also in partnership with Cambiar. So just to give you a sense of who was in the work, so about 90 enterprises. We talked to 50 or so folks prior to the work. We talked to another 25 or so enterprises in depth after the work. There were about 600 respondents in the work from those 90 enterprises. You can see there's a heavy CPG component to that. That was true in 2009 as well, probably pretty intuitive why. But it does make the longitudinal comparison possible. These are big scalable companies, about 63% of them really at global scale. And you had a good mix of participation, both from practitioners, but also from their business line partners, as well as senior executives, and it was a fairly senior response set. The other thing we then did is, coming out of that benchmarking work, probably had 2 pages of line item recommendations for enterprises looking to develop their insights function and their insights capability. Well, we then wanted to take that out to a very senior population, a senior executive population, and kind of get their pragmatic approach to what about the function they think needs to change to a future vision. And we basically kind of ran those recommendations, if you will, through kind of a senior executive pragmatism lens. And so that was about 45 CEOs, brand and regional presidents, and COOs. So you'll see that in here too. But let me take you back. If you're not familiar with this work, and I think all of this is going to be available as I understand it, but if you're not familiar with this work, effectively you have a set of organizations or consumer insights functions that really exist on the left-hand side as you look at it of this framework, which is what I'll call traditional or even emerging. It was often reporting to the CMO. The scope was often mostly marketing topics. It may have been in more of a line order taking role so that the business objective was set outside of the function and the function designed and delivering those business objectives. In addition, it might have been more backward-looking or descriptive, maybe real-time, but that's really where the heritage, if you will, of the function started. And then you can see kind of across the spectrum, I want to focus on 3 and 4. So that's the strategic insight partner and then kind of the evolution to a true source of competitive advantage. What characterizes functions that are in that state of development are a couple of things. So this is one you're focused on more strategic or innovative or forward-looking and predictive purposes, and you see that reflected actually in your budgetary allocation. You are a trusted advisor, so you're pulled into decisions, not just reporting out at a project level, but pulled into decisions and ongoing business decision and core business process support. You're seen as a trusted advisor. In fact, the companies who have insights functions that are operating at a 3 or 4 will describe those folks as strategists, typically. And the distinction between 3 and 4 we'll get into, but it has to do with the level of integration of the function at the more senior ranks. So one of the defining characteristics actually of a 4 is that the head of consumer insights or customer insights is a full-fledged member of the executive or leadership team. They're often a peer, if you will, to the CMO, and they're wearing more of an enterprise hat at that point versus focused on a region or focused solely on a brand. In 2008, about 90% of the companies that we surveyed fell into stages 1 or stage 2. So if we fast forward 7 or 8 years, so behind the recessionary time, like we didn't survey it, if you will, in 2009 or 2010, you would have expected dramatic budgetary decreases as well as FTE decreases, but significantly behind, if you will, the 2008-2009 recession. Well, we were expecting to find 30 to 40% of functions that were scoring in a stage 3 or stage 4. If you look at how much the press talks about it, businesses talk about it, insights leaders talk about it, executive teams talk about it, that was our expectation, if you will. What actually happened, though, is still only about 20% of the enterprises were scoring at a stage 3 or stage 4. And this is coming out of the calls, which I want to give you some appreciation for, where people use language like, we've been on a journey, we've transformed, we've restructured, right? So lots of words around a very aspirational vision, and then also lots of words around the effort and the pain and the sweat over the last 7 years. And yet we're not seeing it in the results. And if I were you, I would say, okay, so why, who cares? Why does this matter? Well, it matters for these reasons. Once you hit a stage 3 and 4, that is the first time that you can see a correlation to externally verifiable outcomes, primarily in loyalty, secondarily in the rate of growth. But as importantly, once you hit a stage 3 or 4, that's where all of the internal metrics also move in the right direction. So things like there is more perceived executive championship. The line perceives the function as more effective. The function is given more credit for faster growth. The function is given more credit for creating competitive, sustainable advantage. The function is perceived as a high return on that investment. So it is almost to the point that if the enterprise is in stages 1 or 2, to be provocative for a moment, that as executive team or head of that function, you should be really questioning and organizing for efficiency and focus versus stages 3 and 4, which are really about creating effectiveness and driving the top line. So that's why it matters. I want to fast forward, and then I'm going to pause because I like to take questions kind of throughout versus just at the end. So if you buy into the vision to be a 3 or 4, which, by the way, is what the executives told us in the quals, it's what the head of consumer insights told us, it's what the literature told us that the vision was, kind of really integrated into the core business decisions and the core business processes. Then the question becomes, so how do I get there? Out of the laundry list of activities that I could do, the barriers that I could try to slay, the investments that I could make, what's the short list of things that I would go work on first? So I would say first you should do a customized diagnostic for yourself, but in general, so generalizing across all of the companies and sectors that are present here today, what do I go do? So what CEOs and COOs said, and actually resonated with the results of the benchmarking is, and you see this kind of arrayed, there were many more prompts than these. This is the more important prompts. You see it arrayed for all sectors and all stages. So the number one thing that senior executives said was, I need to feel more confident that there's a return on that investment that makes me putting my marginal dollar there better than putting my marginal dollar someplace else, whether that's direct or in a capability. And it wasn't that this is the same level of ROI across all of the insights topics as a marketing ROI. That's available in some of the things you do. It's not available in all of the things you do. But just the discipline of moving toward the measurement of the impact, whether it's through a value proof or other mechanisms, force the conversation about priorities, force the conversation about alignment and focus, which then got that flywheel kind of working together in terms of the integration of the function, the executive team, and the business line partner. The other one was around, they think like business owners. So this is what executives said to us. They said, look, no doubt my insights function is the champion of consumers or the champion of customers, right? But what often happens is I get the advocacy and I don't get the reality check, which is it on strategy? Can I afford it? If I can't afford it, how do I engineer to be able to afford it? And that part was missing, at least for these senior executives, in terms of their interactions with the insights function. And then you see a number of other things here. I want to highlight a few. So if it's in bold on the factor list, and you can see it that far away, I'm going to talk about it. But that means it was much more important to a stage 4 than it was to any other stage on the framework. And so highlighting a couple of those. More strategic thinking from the CI leader, use of a strategic plan for the function, not for the business unit, but for the function, alignment on the allocation of the budget, upfront alignment. This one I think is very important. CI has a proprietary learning agenda, which means they are in control of choosing a handful of topics or methodologies that they think the brand or the enterprise should be world-class on. They ring-fence the budget to do that. And the stage 4 also are out in the marketplace, whether that is the market research industry or the broader business market, talking about their world-class understanding of that. Not giving away proprietary insights, but really championing the fact that they've gone deep on, whether it's storytelling or mobile survey technology or neuromarketing or biometrics, but that they're world-class there. We also looked at what the function and business line said were barriers versus what executives said were barriers, and a couple of things pop. So they both agreed on limited budgets. Now, interestingly, we also found that outside of a stage 1, the level of your budget was not determinative of where you were on the framework, outside of a minimally sufficient FTE and budget. But there's the perception that if I had more money, I would do smarter things with it, and it would be better. The other thing that they agreed on is it's hard in our environment because the direct ROI isn't there the way it is on a cost project or the way it is on a marketing ROI. And I have to get creative about value proof, or I have to get disciplined about thinking about my contribution that way. But then line partners and the function very quickly went to things like, well, I don't have the right specialization in-house, or I have insufficient staff, or we just collectively have a short-term focus and I want to do all this innovative and very forward-looking stuff and I'm not allowed to. Whereas executive teams, and I personally believe more of the unlock is on this side of the page, they went to, we don't have the culture for it and we have to solve for that. It's not integrated into the executive team and we have to solve for that. And then data and analytics and how it interplays with traditional insights was also top of mind, not surprisingly, for these executives. I'm going to come back to this, but I do want to hit two more things, and then we'll pause for questions. We saw basically 6 dimensions with which to change the trajectory of your insights function, and they were across things like vision and pace, seat at the table in leadership, the technical, or not technical, I should say, the functional blueprint. So what are you hiring into your leadership? What are you hiring into your consumer insight function? How do you work with the line? Is it push or pull? And then a set of things that probably can be collapsed, but a set of self-deterministic things that the function can either do in its favor or it's doing a set of things that are barriers. The one I want to spend a little bit of time on is the integration with the executive team. Because when you asked executives what capability, this is across sectors, what capability they most wanted to invest in, both unprompted and prompted, consumer insights or customer understanding was number 1. Which I'm not sure everybody would say that they feel that in their organization, right? And then you ask CEOs, and maybe they feel obligated to say this, but you ask CEOs and presidents and COOs, who is an active champion of the function on the executive or leadership team? And the CEO said, well, absolutely, that's me. I'm actively championing the function. Well, their organizations felt very differently. So their organization said, yes, I feel it from the CMO, right? But look at the strongly agree for CEO, or if it had a president, brand, regional, product, however they're organized. Very low. So a profound disconnect between what the executive team says is a priority to how that intent, and I assume it's positive intent, I'm not ascribing malintent to it, but how that filters down and is felt by the organization. One thing we strongly believe is that there's no way you push yourself across the stage 1 or 2 in the framework to 3 and 4. It has to be a pull and a push because there's just too much inertia to do that from the function alone. And often structurally, you also can't do it because you're not reporting in many instances high enough to do that. So I tie this back to the things then that presidents and COOs said was their shortlist or their blueprint for the transformation of the function in their organizations. And so you can see CI having a high ROI, alignment of incentives at a business outcome level. So not just I went through the activities, but those activities actually generated faster growth, higher TSR, more market share, whatever the objectives are. The CI role in decision making, oftentimes, so we tested 34 core decisions and business processes where we routinely see CI used. The best performing sector used CI routinely in about 50% of those. The worst performing sectors in about 40% of those. Oftentimes functions misinterpret this to mean my way to greater impact is to impact more of those decisions and core processes. That works if you have a sufficient headcount and if you have sufficient budget. But in the trend of the last 7 to 8 years, where headcount's gone down, budgets, primarily by sectors, have gone down, you actually have to be hyper-focused in terms of the business processes and decisions you want pulled into. Because in those, you want to operate as a stage 3 or a stage 4, and you want to seed or outsource another set of things. So if it is backward looking and descriptive, if it is tactical in nature, potentially even if it's real time and you're not kind of managing the engagement, those types of things you want to outsource or do away with or do minimal on in favor of focusing on a set of things that are more strategic, more predictive, more innovative. And that really gets to the research focus. So this idea of if more of my budget were actually allocated to strategic insight work, or if more of my budget were actually allocated to predictive and anticipatory, or more of my budget was allocated to innovation, then I would feel as an executive team more linkage between what I'm trying to drive in terms of business outcomes and where my insights is focused. Was there a question over here? Not at all, please.
It might have been page 9 where you had some of the.
Oh,
You were.
is it page?
Sorry.
Yep.
So on one of your pages, you were talking about the barriers.
Yes.
And yeah, that one.
Oh, okay, this one.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about why, sorry, CEOs were saying data analytics was one of the barriers? Just can you expand on that?
Sure, absolutely.
The budget one made sense.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to understand how they were thinking, why they were thinking data and analytics was a barrier on insights.
No, I think it's a great question. So it depends a little bit on your heritage of where insights comes from. So if you're CPG and your heritage is more a traditional insight, qualitative, survey generated, then, and that's where more of the biases in the survey, if you will, then they're actually trying to figure out what to do with commercial big data. Oftentimes those brands may have more limited access to sell-through data or individually identifiable data. And so they would describe it, if I think literally a quote is, if my CI function is in its teens, my data and analytics function is in its tweens, right? So they see it as kind of behind, if you will, the development. That is different for consumer banking, credit cards, retail, restaurant, any place where the insight actually typically started with big data analytics and is migrating into what we think of as more traditional insights. There, they face a different problem, which is they've grown up in different organizations. They are competing often for budget, and yet there's not a unifying person that is making decisions across the budget about where to allocate to the highest return, because it's being made through the budgetary process to put it down into 2 functions. Then it can be optimized, but it can't be dynamically managed against ROI. Sure. So I think we only have a couple of more minutes left, but let me kind of take questions. I have a slide in here behind kind of each of these 6, but I think it's more important to kind of take your questions.
Hi, I'm over here.
Oh, thank you.
You may have covered this in your first few slides that I missed. I apologize.
Okay.
But it seems to me when you're doing a survey like this, is there universally accepted definition of what an insight is?
It's a great question. So what we did, because you can imagine you can't solve for every permeation of that. So what we did is we had the respondents define what was in and out of their definitions and in and out of their budgets. And then we were able to assemble topics or groups that are typically in retail or typically in apparel and fashion or typically in kind of CPG. Now, I will say that is a functional answer. I will say from a process standpoint, it was pretty unified. People saw an activity of insights or an outcome of insights, which is I generate high quality proprietary data. I distill analytically or otherwise insights from that data. I then translate that data into a business recommendation or action, which, by the way, 8 years ago, very few people were talking about that. And then moving forward, I provide ongoing support of my business line partner so that I am helping make real-time decisions using a consumer, and I would argue consumer and economic and strategic lens. So there was consensus on that value chain, but less consensus on what groups were in and out. Good question.
Hi, great presentation. I was wondering if you had differences in the growth of a 3 and 4 level companies versus a 1 and 2, either in stock price or revenue. And then as a follow-up, what are some ammunitions that people can go to leadership with to advocate for greater focus?
Yeah, so great. So let me handle that in 2 bounces. The first answer is it really depends on sector. So some of these sectors like retail or the sectors I focus on, which I call the vanity categories, have experienced extreme anemic growth in the last kind of 7 or 8 years. So there you might be looking at double growth rates because you're going from 2% to 4%. In faster growing sectors, it would be less than that, but still statistically significant to see the correlation. And then ammunition. So we have a larger body of work that provides kind of ammunition across all 6 of these. What I've tried to do is highlight the ones that I would go to the executive team with, which is a couple. I showed you the self-professed intent to support and develop the function versus what's felt in the organization. I think that's a big disconnect. The other one I would say is we did 2 things. First, we looked at natural language analysis of investor presentations, of the management letters in annual reports, of earning calls. And we looked and tallied all the words that were internally focused. And this is where the introverted, not inverted, but the introverted organization or corporation came from. Luckily, those 2 words, inverted means upended, so it still applies here. But we looked at words that were internal, like metrics, cost-cutting, performance, culture, those types of things that were self-reflective. And we looked at all the words that were external: customer, test and learn, consumer, competition. And we actually segregated the companies that were using and looked at their mix, internal to external language, as they communicated outward. And what we found is higher growth rates on the externally focused companies. Some of that it's correlated with them being digital in nature or upstarts in nature or smaller in scale, and so it's easier to grow off that base. But I still think the implication is important for the more behemoth organization that's been around for a longer time, that is more functionally siloed. And the thing that we ask folks to do is just go in your next week's worth of meetings and do your own little tally. On the left-hand side, anytime a topic comes up that's externally focused. On the right-hand side, anytime the topic comes up that's internally focused. What I think you'll actually find in many of your organizations is even though we talk an externally focused game, we actually spending a lot of time looking inward. So those might be some suggestions.
Yeah, my question is about how the function is evolving or maybe changing over time. So given what seem to be the trends around the democratization of data, or certainly the abundance of data, the tools, the data visualization, and then also this desire to bring analytic people into more of the organization. Mm-hmm. Do you see that function changing, becoming a more distributed function somehow?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So there's a lot of ways to skin that cat because there are structural answers, but even within convoluted structures, if you have enabling cross-functional mechanisms or capabilities, you can kind of mitigate the structural. So it's obviously evolving to a different set of specializations. The budgets are evolving to that. So I'm thinking digital and I'm thinking big data analytics. Certainly this idea of picking up on insights, not just from the insights function, but that multiple people, including your fans, including your customers, can be champions of insight. I still think, we think those working at least within a common framework so that you understand what role corporate has versus BU, if the functions are separate and don't report up to the same individual, what role commercial big data analytics has versus a traditional insight has. And the reason for that is we just see the world of continuing constrained headcount, continuing constrained budget. All of these are meant to be focused on a consumer or customer capability that they're both trying to provide. And so organizing that within a common framework with clear roles and responsibilities and good collaboration procedures is, probably the way that, most organizations will go after this.
We'll take one more question.
Thanks so much for sharing these results. I'm interested in learning more. I work for Chadwick Martin Bailey. We're a research consultancy, and we see companies at each of those 4 stages and are always most engaged and happy to work with those that are 3 and 4. We know that their success will be greater with the information that we can provide them. I think department leadership is a big differentiator between 1 and 4. The talent, the caliber, the political savviness of the person who's leading the department. But I'm also really keen to ask you about specific. I'm thinking one of our clients has a kind of an RFP request, which includes the risk if research is not done, right? Mm-hmm. To help to develop that ROI. Mm-hmm. Like what could happen if this isn't explored, if budget mm-hmm. isn't expended to that? And I'm wondering if you have any other concrete examples of the ROI question. I understand how it could be valuable, but it's awfully hard to put a number beside much of the research that's being done.
So I think if it's harnessed toward some marketing intents, you see how it's easier to do because, a visual resonates more or doesn't. A message or an offer resonates more. It's easy to see how insights applied to pricing or promotion can have a hard ROI, right? But I assume the question is there's a whole set of things that you may be doing, brand building, market entry, even packaging design may have a easy ability to do a hard ROI. But what you're measuring may be a piece of a larger puzzle. It may be cross-functional in nature. It may be multi-year or multi-quarter in terms of following the impact. So I have 2 tangible examples there. I don't think I have a great answer for the supplier or the market research sector, though I do think they should be part of solving this for companies. But the 2 tangible examples are, one, doing a value proof, which is to say, connecting with strategy or connecting with finance to say we're going to do a post-mortem on our critical few initiatives where insights is deeply embedded. We're going to start with what the objectives were, what we thought the outcomes would be, whether that's share, dollar, whatever the case may be. And we're going to follow it over either multiple quarters or multiple years. And yes, we're not going to be perfectly precise that it was insights impact versus analytics, but collectively together, the customer insight capability was largely instrumental. The second I would have is for people that actually run or engaged in consumer insight functions. Your 360s, at least as I've observed them, often are things like, I did a set of activities well or not well. I was responsive or not responsive. You're satisfied with my performance or not satisfied. I would change all of that to be about business outcomes. Even though it's perceived, it's a different conversation. So I was effective in reaching our business outcomes. We contributed to faster growth. We had a higher ROI. We contributed to sustainable competitive advantage. And if not, why not? And what will we do? And let me give you one third example, which is the use of a strategic plan. So less than 30% of the benchmarks, use a strategic plan for the function. I'm not talking about, our insights input into a strategic plan for the business unit or the brand, but use it for the function. Stage 4 have strategic plans. They have 12 to 18-month operating plans. They engage the executive team on the allocation of the budget. They report back anywhere from 1 to 4 times a year to the executive team, and they have direct access to the board. So I think that they're giving me we're done. So thank you very much for your interest.